I have 6:10 on my computer, and I'm thinking that we should probably go ahead and start, and other people can join us as they come in.
That sounds great. Um, okay, so we have Spanish interpretation. Um, and let me see how I can say this correctly. I'm also going to ask Miguel to put it in the chat because I can't copy and paste it, but um, Abra interpretación para la reunión de esta tarde, por favor, busque en su pantalla el icono del globo o mundo y escoja el idioma español. Great. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. My name is Jillian Zeiger, and I'm a principal planner in the Housing and Grants Division at the County of Marin. We are here today to provide an informational overview about an affordable housing bond that will be on the ballot in November. Because we work for the county, we are not advocating or taking a position on the bond. There are other efforts of groups advocating for and against the housing bond, and you may hear from them separately, but we are just here to provide information and gather your input. As you will hear tonight, the bond is a regional effort with all 9 counties in the Bay Area. If approved by the voters, the County of Marin will receive funds for affordable housing development in all of the cities, towns, and unincorporated areas. This process must be consistent with a local spending plan. A steering committee made up of representatives of Marin cities, towns, and the county are working together on the local plan, and they want to hear from you about how funds should be spent if approved by the voters. Thank you for being here to listen to information about the housing bond, and we look forward to gathering your input about this local plan. We also have a survey on our website and more information if you'd like to attend other meetings at marinhousingbond.org. I will also put that in the chat. And I'm going to hand it off to our consultant team, RGS.
Thank you, Jillian, and thank you all for choosing to share your Monday afternoon with us today on this very important issue. So my name is Tom Schwedhelm, and I am part of the consultant team for Regional Government Services, and we've been contracted to conduct these meetings to gather the information that will help inform the expenditure plan that Jillian made reference to. So my background, really briefly, I've been with RGS about a year and a half, but 40 years prior to that, I've worked in municipal government in Sonoma County. So really looking forward to hearing all of the thoughts and comments that will be made tonight. Lucy, would you like to introduce yourself as part of our team too?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Lucy, and I work as an instructional designer for RDS. So normally I design trainings for local government professionals. I also support our outreach efforts and community engagement efforts as a technical host. So if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please feel free to message me. Chris.
And my name is Chris Sliz. I also work for Regional Government Services. I've been working there for about 10 years, doing consulting in a variety of different ways. I've been hanging around local government and municipalities for, I think, about 35 years. So we consider ourselves to be very lucky to be working with you tonight. And thank you for your patience with regard to the link for the meeting. We really appreciate it. And we'll make sure that we fix that problem so it doesn't happen again. With that, I'm going to go ahead and start our presentation. I am going to say we're a very small group, and we have some information in terms of a PowerPoint and to talk a little bit about what the background is and context of BAFA, and also some questions for you. So when we get to those questions, what I would really appreciate is if you don't mind if I facilitate. Sometimes what happens in a group like this is one person takes up more airtime than everybody else, and we have limited airtime. So I may go ahead and say something like, you've given a lot of information. It would be great to hear from another person. And I hope you'll be patient with me with regard to that, because it's always difficult, I think, to have balanced communication. Thank you for that up front. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And that's not my PowerPoint. Here's my PowerPoint. So I'm going to tell you again, we'll just give you a little bit of the purpose of today's meeting is really twofold. What we want to do is we want to give you some background context and information about BAFA. We want you to understand what it is. And most importantly, what we want is some input from you on what it is that you think should happen with these monies if the bond is passed. So just a little bit about the BAFA. BAFA stands for Bay Area Housing and Finance Authority. It was established by the legislature in 2019 as a regional entity to help solve affordable housing shortage in the 9 Bay Area counties. So the legislature recognized we weren't making a lot of progress going with one city at a time. They also recognized that we really work and live on a regional basis in the Bay Area. You might work in one city or county and live in another city or county. So that's why the rationale of this working as a region on affordable housing issues. The purpose of BAFA, or the purpose of the authority, is to raise, administer, and allocate funding and provide technical assistance to address regional issues. And what you'll hear people talk about often are the 3 Ps. They talk about the production of affordable housing, creating new housing, the preservation of affordable housing, and that is keeping the housing that is in stock and affordable, keeping it that way. And we also talk about tenant protections, which we'll have quite a bit more conversation about in a few minutes. We want to go through and define those 3 areas. First, what I do want you to know is where the funding comes from. On November 5th, the authorities placed a bond measure on the ballot that will be voted on in each of the 9 Bay Area counties. If it's approved by voters, the bond measure would raise $20 billion. The important thing, I know it's a huge amount of money, and you know, it's great because there's an 80% return to source, which means that 80% of the funding that is contributed by Marin County comes back to Marin County. So for Marin County, that would mean about $699 million.
Wow.
The role that you have is really key. Jillian mentioned earlier in the introduction that Marin County cities, towns, and county representatives have to create a local expenditure plan of how the funds will be used across the county if the bond is approved. Local input guides this plan. So this is exactly where you come in with regard to local input. We are having several meetings to get people's input into the plan. The final expenditure plan has to be approved at a public meeting of the Board of Supervisors. Then it's sent to BAFA for approval. And that final expenditure plan needs to be in alignment with what BAFA has in their bond measure. And I want to tell you exactly what that is. The bond has this kind of a breakdown for the permitted use of funds. 52% of the funds are to be used for production, and this is the production of new affordable housing for home ownership or rental. It's all focused on affordable housing. There are $0 in BAFA for market rate housing. There is also, I'm going to shift some things around on my screen because I have a little tiny screen that I work off of. There are also, what you see are 15% of the funds go toward preservation. And this is preservation of existing affordable housing. So if people currently live in affordable housing and the deed restriction is up, or the owner is going to sell and there is no deed restriction on it, BAFA funds might be used to preserve that housing as affordable. I'm going to go up to the left-hand corner and talk a little bit about the flexible housing related funds. That 28% can be used for a variety of things. We'll talk about more here in a minute, but it could be used for infrastructure needs that are integral to new affordable housing. And again, we're going to take a deeper dive into these in a minute. The tenant protection that I left for last, that's 5%. There's a question mark behind this 5%. And that is because currently the California Constitution prohibits the use of this kind of general obligation bond for anything but brick and mortar. And tenant protection could be things like rental assistance. So there also is a measure on the ballot on November 5th to amend the California Constitution so that it would allow for general obligation bonds like this to be used for tenant protection. That there is a bit of a question mark behind that one right now. So this is the deeper dive into the definitions of the 3 Ps. So production is defined again as investing in the construction of new affordable homes and converting non-housing structures, vacant shopping malls, vacant offices into homes. So some examples of eligible uses are new affordable rental units. It could be new affordable home ownership, triplexes, duplexes, condominiums, townhouses, single family residence. It really runs the gambit with regard to what those eligible uses are. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the non-eligible uses are new market rate homes. There are no market rate dollars in the BAFA funding. Preservation is defined as investments in existing buildings with the goal of preventing displacement of low-income households and stabilizing communities. So the example we have here is to purchase naturally occurring affordable buildings to deed restrict them. Another example is if you have a number of apartments and homes in Marin County that were built in the 70s and 80s, and people have lived in those since the 70s and 80s. They are naturally affordable housing. There's nothing needs to happen with them with regard to keeping them affordable housing. BAFA fund, to having them be affordable housing. BAFA could be used to keep those as affordable housing. So that's one way that preservation, an eligible use for preservation. Protection, again, I mentioned that big question mark, that examples of if the bond is passed and the amendment is passed to the Constitution, protection could mean emergency rental assistance. It could mean eviction legal services, counseling, training, education. There are many things that fall under that protection, headline. The flexible funding is, personally, I think the flexible funding is pretty interesting. As the flexible funding, or the 28% can be spent on housing and housing related uses like infrastructure and neighborhood amenities, as long as it directly supports a BAFA funded affordable housing development. So it could be interim housing. If you live in, if housing is being built in an area that only has septic systems, it might be used for that septic system infrastructure. It might be used for silent second mortgages or accessory dwelling units. And again, it cannot be used for market rate housing. As I mentioned before, it can be used in the production or preservation of affordable housing, as we discussed it just a couple of minutes ago. It's really important. All housing related use expenditures have to be necessary or incidental to affordable housing supported by the bond. We can't just put a pedestrian pathway in an area in a neighborhood that we think needs one that is not related to new affordable housing or a building constructed using bond funds. It also could be used to create homeownership assistance programs like down payment assistance. It could be used for low to moderate income communities. So there are all kinds of things that could be done with that. When it comes to the flexible funding, the things that are important are, number one, is the flexible funding. The use of the flexible funding has to conform with the adopted county expenditure plan. Number two, there has to be a cap on affordability at 120% of area median income. And number three, there has to be an imposition of a deed restriction on the affordable housing. So deed
I'm in a
restriction.
meeting.
Deed restriction. Oh, I'm not sure
I
if
know
you
I'm
realize.
writing.
Not sure, Linda, I think you might have your microphone on. The deed restriction is a minimum of 55 years. It could vary and go on for eternity, depending on the conditions, depending on how the loan is structured. So I'm just going to say it that way. Those are the 3 Ps. Those are the general definitions of the 3 Ps. And that's in terms of the information that we have for you. It's the big data dump. We have several questions for you. We have 4 specific questions for you, but I do want to go ahead and put this QR code up because we're talking to people. We're also conducting a countywide survey, and we thought that some of you might want to take the survey as we walk through these questions. So I'm going to first stop my share so I can see you all and ask if you have any questions. Okay, I'm not hearing any questions. So we are
We
going to
do
go
have some
ahead.
raised hands actually, Chris,
Oh, you do? Great.
from Barbara and Bruce.
Thank you. Barbara.
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple of questions. First of all, when you're talking about the preservation funds, can those be used to revitalize existing affordable housing? Good question.
I'm going to say, I believe so, yes, but I'm going to ask Jillian for confirmation on that.
Never speak again. Let's just move.
Is there any way we can mute people who aren't talking? It's distracting, or if you can mute yourself. So
Yeah.
Barbara, I just want to clarify, you were asking for the preservation funds, could it be used for rehabilitation?
Yes.
Yes, so coupled with acquisition, the funds can be used for if they're coupled with the acquisition at the same time. So if they're purchasing and creating affordable housing, sometimes in that purchase there needs to be some upgrades for habitability. So
But they can't be used, say, for the current 6 public housing projects in Marin County?
so that's not considered preservation, but those are some ideas for our flexible funds.
So that could only come out of the flexible funds. Okay.
Correct.
Then the other question that I have is, when you're talking about affordable, what are you talking about? Affordable in Marin County is ridiculous.
Right.
It goes up to, I think for a single person, up to around 90,000 a year.
Or that.
So, I'm wondering what, are you talking about low income, very low income, extremely low income, or how are you defining affordable? Because affordable in Marin County is not affordable for the people that I work with in Marin City.
Where I understand it, I'm looking right now at a chart that has income levels, and
Yeah,
that 120% of AMI is the maximum for affordable housing, and for a family, for two people, 120% of AMI is about $179,000 in Marin County.
right,
So
right.
yeah. So that's the cap, and it goes down from there. So when we talk about affordable, that's 120% of AMI. When you talk about 35% of AMI for two people is about $52,000. So it really it depends. It depends on how many people you're talking about and what percent of the
Right.
average
I know
median
that chart.
income.
I'm just, for example, I believe the AMI in Marin City is about 38,000. So this is not going to be affordable to those people. And that's my concern.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Barbara, I just want to add that our
Yeah,
local expenditure plan can specify what AMIs we want to prioritize with
Oh.
the production buckets and the preservation buckets. So when you take the survey, and if you want to send us a comment just detailing what your recommendations are for AMI, that's something we'll bring to our steering committee and incorporate in our discussions around the local expenditure plan. But that's a really good point, you know, that people who make, you know, upwards of $100,000 are considered low income. So what
Right.
type of housing should we prioritize with BAFA? It's a good point.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jillian, and thanks, Barbara. Bruce, do you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I didn't get the link until about, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes after 6, maybe 15 after 6, and I kind of came in when you were talking about $699 million may be Marin County's share. So I don't know if I missed much of the beginning of what you said or not. But my question is, when we talk about affordable housing, aren't we really talking about subsidized housing? Because it's not going to get built without subsidies. And I wish we would be talking about the same thing rather than affordable housing. It's subsidized housing, correct?
I guess I guess it depends on your definition of it. What the bond does is it provides the funding to build or purchase affordable housing. So that is, you know, it's a bond measure. It's funded by taxpayer dollars that are coming back into Marin County. That $699 million comes back into Marin County, and that's what's used to build or purchase affordable housing.
Right. I mean, if the state of California taxpayers are on the hook for $20 billion, then they are subsidizing the housing, correct? I mean, you know, when I hear the word affordable housing, and this is to Barbara's point, in Marin County, affordable housing, you know, for someone who makes $179,000 just seems ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And when you talk about affordable housing, and you say are you in favor of affordable housing? They're all going to say, yeah. Are you in favor of workforce housing? Of course, yeah. But if you say, are you in favor of subsidized housing? You get a whole different answer because they're not sure what exactly you're talking about. But I think that is what we're talking about. And that's why I think this whole bond measure sounds terrific. We're building affordable housing and workforce housing, but it's really subsidized housing. Now, that's a great issue. I mean, I'm trying to be neutral on this. It's a great issue, and it's up to the voters to decide. But the voters should be aware that what they're voting on is subsidized housing, not affordable housing or workforce housing, because someone else has got to pay for it. And it's the taxpayers who are paying for it. That's my point.
And thank you for making that point. Yeah, it is. It's taxpayer funded. And so, and the money is coming back into Marin to make decisions, to Marin to produce affordable housing. And you are absolutely right. Your point is well taken. So that, and it depends, you know, people have the option of when they vote on November 5th and determining what it is they want to do. So David, I see that your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify sort of that last question. The level of subsidy, though, varies, right? So that depending on the project, you know, some projects I think would have higher levels of subsidy, maybe because they're reflecting lower or supported lower incomes. Other projects might have other types of subsidies, and the bond measure is, I think, flexible enough to be able to support different levels of subsidy. Is that correct?
I believe that that's the intention is, and I'm making a huge assumption here, new housing costs more to produce, to construct than it takes to purchase a building that already exists and do some conversion on it. So there are, yes, there are a variety of different things that can be funded with the bond money.
Okay.
Thanks for
Yeah,
that.
thank you.
So I'm going to go quickly to these 4 questions that will guide if the bond passes. That kind of your input will guide the expenditure plan that's produced by county, cities, and towns in Marin. So our first question is, what are your greatest concerns about housing in your community? Barbara, I heard you talk a little bit about the cost of housing just in general.
Yeah, I mean, my greatest concern at the moment, quite truthfully, personally, is Golden Gate Village, which is the public housing, the only public housing property in Marin County that allows families. And it's in a horrible state of disrepair. And it's going to take a huge amount of money to bring it just up to health and safety and comfort levels. So I would be mostly interested in money that could be used to revitalize Golden Gate Village, as well as truthfully there are 5 other smaller public housing properties in Marin County that only serve seniors and disabled. And I think they're in bad shape too. The one that I'm most familiar with is Golden Gate Village because that's where I work. But that to me, that's the biggest need that I'm aware of in Marin County.
Barbara, thank you. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if Linda or Pat, what would you like to add? And I see, David, you have your hand raised. Go ahead and pipe in.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern is the cost of construction. I think in Marin or in the Bay Area in general, I remember reading a statistic about San Francisco that, you know, building, you know, housing for, you know, people who are formerly homeless is something like $1 million a unit. And I think we just got to solve that problem. We can't have a situation where, you know, it costs that much money to provide, you know, housing because the subsidies end up being so large that you end up actually not building very much housing anyway, even if you do, you know, have these kinds of large bond measures. I think my secondary concern is communities do not have the mix of housing to be able to support the types of jobs that are in their, you know, communities. I live in Tiburon, a real nice place. it doesn't have the mix of housing that's necessary for the people who work here. Whether it's, you know, the people who clean the dishes at the restaurants or the people who, you know, teach at the schools. And so, you know, you have to have a mix of housing to be able to support that. And some of it's going to be fancy houses on a hill, and some of it needs to be multi-family houses that, you know, are in filling our parking lots in downtown. So I think you've got to sort of solve those two issues. And obviously that's a real challenge in many of the Marin communities that, you know, we need to, you know, address.
Thank you for that. I just want to check in with Linda and Pat. You haven't had an opportunity to pipe in yet. Just want to check in with you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead to Naomi. Do you have anything you want to add?
I am not going to add to this. I'm a reporter with the ARC newspaper. But I did put in the chat, if Barbara wouldn't mind sharing her last name. I'm not sure if she saw that.
Okay, thank you.
And Chris,
Thank
we
you
do
for
have a
that.
comment from Linda in the chat.
Okay. Did you read that, Lucy?
Yeah, all good points. Concerned about having enough affordable housing for working people. Many are getting priced out. Young people can't afford to live here. How would this bond measure help?
Great. Thank you. Well, hopefully by building the kind of housing that would allow more people to live in Marin or closer to where they work. Bruce, what would you add on this one?
Well, I agree with David in terms of the cost of housing and building affordable housing. I've heard similar figures, $900,000 to $1 million to build an affordable unit in Marin County. That's one issue. The other issue, do we have the labor to do it? And particularly up against the housing element that is excessive and basically unachievable. So I have concerns that the money isn't going to go very far. And besides that, if I'm not mistaken, in 2018, there was another bond measure of about $18 billion for affordable housing. I don't know where that money went, but it was an extraordinary amount of money that, you know, who knows where that went. It certainly didn't build affordable housing in Marin County. So I'm not sure this is going to work. But as I say, it's up to the voters to decide, and let's see what happens.
Thank you. So my next question for you is, what type of housing is most needed in your community? And I'm thinking multifamily, single homes, ownership, rentals. What type of housing is most needed? David?
Well, it's not big fancy houses on hills. We got lots of those in Tiburon and Mill Valley and those types of things. So we also have a lot of empty parking lots in downtown, which is where our housing plan says that a lot of multifamily housing needs to be able to support. You know, I think people of more moderate incomes, obviously moderate incomes in the Bay Area is different than the moderate incomes in Knoxville, Tennessee. But at the same time, you know, there has to be ways for folks to not have to travel from Sonoma County just because they're teaching our children math. So I think it's some of the statistics I've seen about county workers and the amount of county workers, for instance, that live outside the county, that's just not sustainable. To be able to have, you know, 2/3 of your workforce that's coming into to work in the county to not actually live in the county. So, you know, we need to be able to have obviously housing that is more affordable, which obviously there's compromises you have to make to allow that to happen, multifamily housing that are still, you know, effective. And, you know, it has to be able to support families because people want to have families and people should be able to have families. So it's certainly a lot of compromises in an area where land is so expensive and construction costs are so expensive, partly because construction workers are coming from areas that are 70, 80 miles away. But our communities, I think, there is no ability to keep the status quo, because we're just going to end up in a place that, all the rich people that live here don't actually have any services or anybody to teach their kids or fight their fires.
Thank you. So status quo, you're saying the status quo isn't sustainable.
Yeah, not at all. I think there's obviously the variety of mechanisms that are necessary, and I applaud, frankly, these kinds of bond measures, but at the same time, they have to be partnered and coupled with ways to reduce the cost of housing. Otherwise, you're just not building enough housing to be able to sort of make it worthwhile. And there's probably a lot of regulatory overreach that's causing a lot of these costs. And it's a variety of things, obviously, that sort of makes all that happen. But I think we somehow have to really work hard to just reduce the cost of housing in order to allow us to be able to be effective at it.
Thank you. Other responses to this question? Barbara, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I do. I totally agree with what David said. And the other reason it's not sustainable is that young people can't afford to live here. I hear that over and over. I mean, I know some of them. I hear that over and over again. People's kids can't afford to stay here. Well, it's not sustainable if, I mean, the Marin population is already incredibly old. And if we don't, if younger people can't live in Marin, that's not sustainable. So that's the other issue. I think one of the approaches that we've been looking at in other in communities are community land trusts and low income, low equity, what's it called, LEHC, limited equity housing co-ops. So if that's, I think, one of the only ways we're going to be able to provide housing that young people and people who, are service workers and don't make even 90,000 a year. As when they do a project and they say this is affordable for 90,000 a year, if you make up to low income, you really pretty much have to make near the top of that range in order to afford it. It's not, although you would qualify for it, it wouldn't be affordable if you only made 50,000 a year if it's low income.
Barbara,
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Bruce, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I think the issue shouldn't be a one size fits all. I think you have to look at this community by community. And let me give you an example. When I bought my house in 1977, there was a 220 unit apartment complex directly across the street from my house. I've lived here for 47 years. I don't see any children in that building at all, none. And so in where I live in Strawberry, when you talk about multifamily housing, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have housing for families with children. And I think the issue here becomes we want housing balance. We can't have all multifamily housing. And even if we do, it may not be housing affordable or suitable for families with children. And our community had a problem with this because when we developed our community plan, the framers recognized that without having families with children, our public school is in jeopardy of closing. And sure enough, for 10 years, from 1990 to 2000, our public school was closed for lack of children because we didn't have housing suitable for families with children. And I'm seeing this same issue play out again because in the newspaper recently, people who live in Tam Valley, which is directly across Highway 101 from Strawberry, those parents are now upset because they're shipping their children across, or busing, I should say, their children across Highway 101 to our school at Strawberry Point. And so that leads me to believe that once again, Strawberry may not have enough housing for families with children. And of course, we've been criticized for it by county planners because of certain language in our community plan. But I just think that's a false argument. We'll save that for another day. But I think those are the issues that really need to be thought about. You need housing balance, and you can't have all multifamily housing because remember, people who are renters do not pay property taxes. The people who pay property taxes are the owners of the buildings, and many times, for example, this apartment complex behind me is on 5 parcels. And so they pay 5 parcel taxes, which is equivalent to the parcel taxes that 5 single-family homeowners pay. So you need to be careful too of the tax implications of having all multifamily housing. You need housing balance.
Great, Bruce, thank you for that. David, I'm going to give you the last word on this question and then go ahead and move on. Oh, you're still muted.
I think I would comment to your perspective, Bruce, that I agree with you that we do need housing balance. But the problem is that Marin in particular, and then California in general, put so much emphasis for so many years on single family homes that because of a peculiar economics associated with the construction of single family homes that existed from, after the war, 1950s, 1970s, and the costs and construction and everything else that was associated, and the land acquisition costs that were associated with that, that we built way too many single family homes, and we basically do not have housing balance at all right now, of which Marin is one of the most extreme examples, right? So what we built was, I don't know what the percentage of single family homes is in Marin, but I think and I don't know if there's an exact right number, right, between, whatever sort of multifamily versus whatever the, number of single families is. But my sense is, having lived in Marin for 30 years as well, that, we do not have balance at all because we have way too many single family homes. And so if you build a lot of multifamily, you're actually bringing the county back into balance. One other sort of final anecdote I would offer is that the issue exists across the income scale of young people moving into the family. We happen to have raised a daughter in Marin. She was lucky enough to go to medical school. She's a physician now. She takes care of older people. She doesn't feel like she can move to Marin, even though she would very much like to, because she doesn't think she can afford it. Now, clearly, can a physician afford to sort of live in Marin? Yes, but if you compare that to Sacramento and the lifestyle you can have in Sacramento, compare the lifestyle of Marin, it's a completely different, situation, even for those people that are higher up on the income scale. And so if you look at Kaiser and other places, they're having an extremely difficult time hiring the physicians that are necessary to take care of those of us who are in our 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s that are going to need a lot of physicians to be able to support us during that period of time. So it's important that, yes, we have balance, but it's also important we just have more housing to be able to support those folks.
Thank you. And I'm going to move to the next question because we're starting to run out of time. Bruce, I'm wondering if you would be willing to put your comments on this question into the chat so that we make sure that we still get them. My last question is, what do you think the number one, if the measure is passed, what do you think the number one priority for BAFA funds should be in Marin County? I'm going to say, Linda, thank you. I've been seeing your comments in chat and I appreciate it. Number one priority for the use of BAFA funds. And David, since you just spoke, I'm just going to give a pause and see if anybody else wants to pipe in there and see if you, Bruce, had your hand up on the last question. Do you have things that you want to say with regard to this question since I cut you off? And
Well, again, I think the money should be used for subsidized housing. And I just worry that the money isn't going to go very far in Marin County. I mean, it's ridiculous to have construction costs of $900 to $1 million per unit. It's just very expensive housing because you're building it in some of the most expensive land in the country. And so the other thing you have to keep in mind about Marin County is that 85% of the land is in agricultural trust, parks, or open space, and you can't build on it. So we have a very limited supply of land, and that's the reason the land values are so high here. And I just want to just add just a short point in response to what David was saying. Strawberry has the most multifamily housing of any other community in Marin County, except for Marin City. Marin City and Strawberry have the most multifamily housing of all in Marin County. And it's upward in terms of Strawberry, it's up to 60% right now.
Okay. Thank you for that. With just a few minutes left, David, go ahead and make your point.
I guess the highest priority I would assign would be for public employees. So that would be, people who work for government, people who work, teachers, firefighters, policemen, the people who keep us safe, people who educate our kids. I think those would be the probably more in the middle of the income scale, partly because I think it's a little bit sort of more realistic and the subsidies don't have to be as high for those folks. I think that, having our entire county workforce live outside the county is, I think, just an embarrassment, frankly, to the county. So that's probably the places I would sort of, be in, the number one, side of priority. Although I certainly realize that there are folks with lower income versus those folks that would also have needs as well. But I would prioritize the middle side and particularly the public workers first.
Okay, thank you. Barbara, quickly, anything to add?
Yeah, I would prioritize those people who were prevented historically from buying housing in Marin County, and therefore have not been able to accumulate wealth through owning property the way I have.
Here.
Let me just ask you one other question. When you say, I think it was 699 million, over what time period would that be? And when does the money become available?
Lynn, do you have an answer to that question?
Yes, so there are multiple tranches of funding. And it's going to be over an 8 or 10 year period. I will double check that. And it's not all the money is coming out at the same time, and we also have a chance to revisit our local expenditure plan on a regular basis to make changes as needed to make sure that we spend the money in a timely manner.
Thank you. I would just add that 699 million over a 10-year time period will do very little in Marin County.
Barbara, thank you. And I'm assuming, Linda, you've been putting your input into chat, and so I'm assuming that we'll see your comments coming up in chat as well. So I'm going to say we're already right at 7 o'clock. I'm going to say thank you so much for your time. I'm going to turn it over to Tom for a few minutes and put this QR code up again for you.
Great. There we go. Thank you so much, Chris, for facilitating that portion of this program and for everyone in your comments. What we'd really like for you to do is, if you could, spread the word. So here's a QR code for the survey. We're really interested in hearing your comments and other Marin County residents' comments about what should we be doing with this BAFA housing bond, right? So if you have more questions, actually, can you go to the next slide, Chris? There's some other ways to engage. This will take you to the website that's been created for this project. It's located at www.marinhousingbond.org. And you can list questions there, but it also lists all the other meetings that we'll be having throughout, the next month and a half. There's also some links there for if you have some more specific questions, because BAFA can be very detailed. There's some links there that if you are interested in hearing more information, because we just scratched the surface and providing a general overview about what BAFA is. So a lot of additional resources are out there. And I would like to hand it back over to Jillian. Would you like to make any final comments for today's participants?
Sure. I just want to thank you all for being here and thank you for your feedback. I do want to reiterate that we, as a group, the consultants on this call and myself, we work for the county. We're not advocating or taking a position on the bond. There are other efforts of groups who are advocating for and against the bond. We are here to provide information about the bond and gather your input. So thank you so much for being here and providing that input as we gather it for the local expenditure plan. And make sure to take our survey and go to marinhousingbond.org if you have any other comments or questions.
Well,
Thank
Chris,
you.
Julian, and Tom, thanks very much. I really appreciate hearing about the bond, and thanks for spending the time explaining it.
Great.
Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks,
Thank you
Barbara
all.
and Dave.
Bye-bye.